My family abandoned me after my wife cheated with my cousin and had a baby years later. I discovered their secret. You know, sometimes life throws you curveballs you never see coming. And for me, I thought I'd seen it all. My name's Ethan, I'm 45. And if you'd met me a decade ago, you'd have seen a completely different person. Back then, I was just a guy with a small dream, a wife I thought I'd spend my life with, and a family I believed would always be by my side. But here's where it all took a sharp turn. Out of nowhere, my wife, Lily, asked for a divorce. No explanation, no real reason. Just, I'm not in love with you anymore. 3 years of marriage, childhood sweethearts, and then nothing. She was gone. And the worst part, she left me without any closure, and I was left wondering what I'd done wrong. I thought, well, okay, if my marriage is over, at least I still have my family, right? But then I noticed something strange. My parents and my sister, my own family, began pulling away too. They stopped answering my calls, texts went unread, and when I finally showed up at their door, they wouldn't even open it. It was as if I was some kind of stranger. Imagine that, abandoned by everyone you thought would be there for you. For years I kept asking myself why? What did I do that was so unforgivable that everyone just turned their backs on me like that? It haunted me for so long, eating me up inside, driving me to a dark place. But over time I somehow picked up the pieces. With a few close friends by my side, I managed to pull myself out of that hole. I moved forward and started something new, a restaurant. It wasn't easy, but step by step, I built something out of my pain. Years went by, and the restaurant didn't just survive, it thrived. I expanded, took risks, and created a life I never thought I'd have. I even found love again. My wife, Sarah, and I now have a son, and I honestly thought that chapter of my life, of my family, and that betrayal was finally closed. But here's the thing, life isn't done with you just because you're done with it. A few weeks ago, I did an interview on TV about my journey, the restaurant, and my success story. It was meant to be this proud moment for me, something I could look back on, and well, I thought it was. Until one day I'm sitting in my office and who walks in? My family. The same people who'd ignored me for years, who shut me out when I was at my lowest, now standing there like nothing had happened, telling me they wanted to reconnect. But of course it didn't end there. In fact, that was just the beginning of everything I didn't know. You won't believe what they told me next. They revealed something that left me speechless, something they'd hidden from me all those years. I learned that my wife, Lily, hadn't just left me, she'd cheated on me. And not just with anyone, with my own cousin Jake. And the reason my family cut me off? They knew. They all knew. They'd kept it from me. My own flesh and blood had chosen to keep it a secret because of some family business ties that were more important to them than me. And the most painful part? Lily was pregnant when she left me. I have a daughter, Sophie, a 21-year-old daughter I never knew about. My family hid it all just so they could stay close to Jake and his father. They pretended like I didn't exist, like she didn't exist, and kept Sophie believing that Jake was her father. Imagine that, finding out not only that your wife cheated on you with your cousin, but that your entire family helped cover it up. And now, after seeing me on TV and knowing I'm successful, they think they can just walk back into my life. Like it never happened. Like I'd be grateful to have them back. But I'm not the same person I was all those years ago. This time I have to make a choice. A choice between letting them back into my life and turning my back on people who only care about me now that I'm somebody. And the question is, do I even want them back? Stay with me. Because what happened next, it changed everything. Ethan and Lily's relationship. I still remember the first time I saw Lily. We were just kids back then, young, innocent, and dreaming of the future. She was my first crush, my first everything, and eventually my first love. We grew up together, sharing all those little moments, first dates, late night talks, shared secrets. We built a life together in those early years, a bond that felt unbreakable. So, when we got married, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend. And back then, I couldn't imagine a future without her. I thought we'd grow old together, you know? That kind of love that lasts forever. But then, out of the blue, it all came crashing down. I'll never forget the day she sat me down, looked me in the eye, and told me she wanted a divorce. She didn't cry. She didn't explain. She just said, "I'm not in love with you anymore." I was blindsided. My mind raced with questions, but she didn't give me a single answer. Just kept saying it wasn't me, it was her. I felt like I was in a nightmare, like any moment I'd wake up and find her next to me, like everything was okay. But that moment never came. One day she was just gone. Imagine waking up one day and realizing the life you'd built, the future you'd imagined, just vanished. The person you thought would be with you forever just disappeared without a real reason. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. Every day felt like I was just existing, like I was a shell of myself. And the worst part? I still didn't know why. I kept hoping that maybe my family could help me understand. Maybe they knew something I didn't, maybe they could give me some answers. But when I reached out to them, it was as if they'd all vanished too. My mom, my dad, my sister, they all just stopped answering. I'd call, leave voicemails, even drove to their house a couple of times, but every time, the door stayed closed. I was left on the outside staring at a house that was supposed to be my safe place. It felt like I'd lost everyone at once. My wife, my family. It was like the ground had disappeared beneath me, and I was free falling with no one to catch me. I thought I'd done something horrible, that I'd somehow messed everything up without even knowing. And I carried that weight with me, every single day. For a while I tried to bury it all, to just forget and move on. But it's not easy to ignore that kind of pain. It eats at you, day after day, little by little. I started isolating myself, pulling back from the few friends I had left. Nights turned into endless loops of sleeplessness, wondering what I did wrong, why everyone I loved just disappeared. But eventually I had to make a choice. I could keep drowning in the past, or I could try to pull myself back up. And you know what? One night, after another sleepless stretch, I made a decision. I told myself that if no one else was going to be there for me, I'd have to be there for myself. I needed a fresh start, something to work toward, something to keep me going. And that's when I decided to finally go after a dream I'd always kept on the back burner, opening a restaurant. I'd always loved cooking, sharing food with others, creating a space where people could feel at home. And maybe, deep down, I hoped that if I could make others feel at home, I'd find that feeling for myself again. I didn't have much, just a small place I managed to rent out in Seattle, but I put everything I had into it. Long nights, early mornings, I poured every bit of my hurt, my anger, my loneliness into that place. And slowly I started to feel alive again. Each meal I served, each customer who smiled back at me, it all reminded me that I wasn't as alone as I thought. Little by little I built something I was proud of, something that gave me purpose again. And over time, my little restaurant grew. It didn't just survive, it thrived. People loved it, they came back, told their friends. I expanded, opened a second location, then a third. And before I knew it, I wasn't just a restaurant owner, I was running my own little chain, building a name for myself in the industry. It was something I'd never imagined, but somehow here I was. Life started to feel normal again. Maybe even better than normal. I'd found love again, with a woman named Sarah. She was gentle, kind, someone who'd been through her own hardships. We connected over food, laughter, and eventually, she became my wife. We even have a son now, and I finally started to believe that my painful past was behind me. But then, just when I thought I'd finally left it all behind, my past came knocking. And not quietly, either. After that interview on TV, my family, those people who'd shut me out, who'd ignored me for years, suddenly appeared at my office. They said they wanted to talk, to reconnect, and as much as I didn't want to, part of me needed to know why. I needed to understand. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what they finally told me. They had been hiding a secret from me all these years, one that would shake everything I thought I knew about my own life. And believe me, this was only the beginning of the truth. His family's sudden abandonment. For years I'd wondered what went wrong, why my family just abandoned me. The people who were supposed to be there no matter what, who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Just shut me out of their lives without a single word. And the worst part? They did it during the darkest period of my life, right when I needed them the most. After Lily left, I reached out to my family, desperate for comfort, for answers, for anything that could help me understand. I wanted someone to just say, hey, it's going to be okay, or maybe offer some clue as to why my marriage had fallen apart. But all I got was silence. I'd call and leave messages, hoping someone would call back. Weeks turned into months. At first I thought maybe they were just giving me space, but as time passed it became clear this was intentional. They weren't busy. They hadn't forgotten about me. They were just done with me. I went to their house, thinking maybe there was a misunderstanding, maybe something had happened I didn't know about. I remember standing on their doorstep, waiting, knocking, and then knocking again. Lights were on inside, so I knew they were home, but no one came to the door. I even saw my mom's face peek through the window, and then she just disappeared. Like I was some stranger she was trying to avoid. I can't explain to you what it feels like to see your own mother, the person who raised you, pretend you're not even there. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter. And I walked away from that house, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. I spent nights lying awake, replaying everything in my head, wondering what I'd done to make them turn on me like that. I'd always been a good son, I'd never given them a reason to cut me off, but none of that seemed to matter. And no matter how many times I went over it, I couldn't find an answer. Days turned into months, and I finally realized I had to move forward without them. It wasn't easy, in fact, it felt like I was ripping out pieces of myself just to keep going. I was hurt, I was angry, but I had no choice. I had to survive. So I poured myself into my work. I took all that anger, all that pain, and used it to fuel something bigger. I focused on my restaurant, building something from the ground up. And even though the work was tough, it gave me purpose. Every meal I cooked, every satisfied customer, was like a small reminder that I could make it on my own. I didn't need anyone else. Slowly, I built a life I was proud of. I found joy in the little things again, made new friends, created a small community of people who supported me. And for the first time in a long time, I started feeling like maybe I could be okay. Maybe I didn't need answers, maybe I could just keep moving forward and leave the past behind. And that's what I did. Years went by, and my restaurant became more than just a place to work, it became my sanctuary, my fresh start. It grew, and with it, I grew too. I met my new wife, Sarah, who brought light back into my life, who helped me believe in love and family again. And together, we built something beautiful, a family of our own. But as I found out, the past has a funny way of catching up with you. Just when you think you're finally free, it finds a way to show up uninvited. One day after that interview aired on TV, I was sitting at my desk, reviewing some paperwork for the restaurant, when there was a knock on my office door. I looked up, and there they were, my mom, dad, and sister, standing right there like ghosts from my past. I hadn't seen them in years, hadn't heard a single word from them since they shut me out. And now, suddenly, here they were, telling me they wanted to reconnect. It was so surreal. Part of me wanted to laugh, part of me wanted to scream, and part of me just didn't know what to feel. After all those years of silence, after all those nights wondering what I'd done wrong, they just showed up, acting like nothing had happened, like we could just pick up where we left off. But I couldn't let it go that easily. I needed to know why. Why they'd cut me off when I needed them the most. Why they'd abandoned me when my life was falling apart. I had questions, and I wasn't going to let them leave without answering them. And that's when it happened. That's when the truth came out, the truth that shattered everything I thought I knew. They told me that Lily, my ex-wife, hadn't just left because she fell out of love, she'd been cheating on me. With Jake, my cousin, my own cousin, and my family knew. They'd known the whole time. Not only did they know, but they helped cover it up. They kept it from me because they were worried about family business ties, because Jake's dad, my uncle, was also my father's boss. They didn't want to upset him. So, they chose to keep the secret, to protect the family name instead of protecting me. And the betrayals didn't stop there. Turns out Lily wasn't just cheating on me, she was pregnant when she left. Pregnant with my daughter Sophie. A daughter I never knew about. A daughter who grew up calling Jake her father, while my family just let it happen. They chose to raise her in a lie, to keep me out of her life so they could keep their connections intact. Can you imagine that? Not only being betrayed by your wife but by your own family? They all knew, and they all chose to shut me out, to pretend I didn't exist. Also, they could keep some business relationship safe. And now they had the nerve to come back, thinking that because I'm successful, because I'm somebody now, they can just walk back into my life like nothing happened. But I wasn't that same broken man they left behind. I'd rebuilt myself, found a new family, created a life that didn't include them. And now, standing there in my office, looking at the people who'd caused me so much pain, I had a choice to make. Would I let them back in, or would I finally close this chapter for good? But there was one person who hadn't betrayed me. My daughter, Sophie. She had grown up in this web of lies, believing a man who wasn't her real father. And I knew, deep down, that I had to reach out to her. I needed to give her the choice that I never got a chance to know the truth. Stay with me, because what happened when I reached out to Sophie? It was the beginning of a new chapter, one never expected. Reaching out to Sophie. I can't really explain what it feels like to discover you have a daughter after all these years. To know that, out there, There's a young woman who shares your blood, your story, but has no idea you exist. It was a feeling that was equal parts fear and excitement. Part of me was terrified she'd reject me, that she'd see me as some stranger barging into her life. But I also knew that I couldn't just walk away, I had to try. So I reached out to Sophie. I thought long and hard about how to do it. I didn't want to overwhelm her or come on too strong. After all, she'd been lied to her whole life, raised in a story that had never been true. So I wrote her a letter. I kept it simple, tried to explain things without pushing too much. I told her who I was, that I was her biological father, and that I'd only recently discovered the truth. I explained that I wasn't looking to disrupt her life, but I wanted her to have the chance to know her real story if she wanted to. And then I waited. Days passed. I checked my phone every hour, hoping for a response, any sign that she'd read the letter. It felt like those days were stretching on forever, each one heavier than the last. I prepared myself for the worst, trying to accept the idea that maybe she didn't want anything to do with me, that maybe this was one chapter one never get to write. Then, one evening I finally got a message from her. My heart nearly stopped when I saw her name pop up on my screen. It was short, just a few lines, but it was all I needed to hear. She'd read the letter, and she wanted to meet. She was hesitant, unsure, but she was open to hearing my side. I can't tell you how much that meant to me. After everything, knowing she was willing to give me a chance, it was more than I'd hoped for. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, away from all the noise and chaos of the city. I arrived early, of course, nervous as ever. My hands were shaking as I sat there, waiting, imagining what she looked like, wondering if she'd look like me, if she'd have any of my quirks or traits. I was so lost in my thoughts I didn't even notice her walk in at first. But then, there she was standing right in front of me. It was surreal. I looked at her, and I saw bits of myself, but also something so unique, so purely her. She had this strength in her eyes, this resilience. And I knew right then that she was more than just my daughter. She was her own person, someone who'd built her life without me, without even knowing I was out there. We sat there for a moment, just looking at each other, taking it all in. And then, finally, she spoke. She told me she'd always felt like something was off. She'd always sensed there was something her mother and Jake were hiding from her, something that didn't quite add up. And when she saw my letter, she said it felt like a missing piece of her own story had finally clicked into place. But it wasn't just a simple reunion. She was confused, angry even, and rightfully so. She'd grown up believing Jake was her father, a lie that her whole world was built on. And now suddenly here I was, telling her everything she knew was a lie. She had every reason to be hurt, to turn her back on me, but instead, she listened. She sat there, listening to everything I had to say, every piece of the story I'd been wanting to tell. I told her about the years I spent searching for answers, wondering what I'd done wrong, struggling to rebuild my life. I explained that I only found out about her recently, that I never knew she even existed until my family came back with their so-called apology. I laid it all out there, the pain, the confusion, the betrayal. I didn't hold back because I wanted her to understand that she wasn't alone in this, that she, too, had been caught up in this mess through no fault of her own. She didn't say much at first. She just sat there, letting it all sink in. I could see the wheels turning, the questions in her mind, the struggle to piece together this new reality. And I knew it was a lot to take in. I couldn't expect her to accept it all in one go. But then she looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't expected. It was a kind of understanding, maybe even a little forgiveness. She told me she needed time to process it all, that she couldn't make any promises about what our relationship would look like. But she didn't want to cut me out. She wanted to keep talking, to figure out where we could go from here. And that was all I needed to hear. I didn't expect a fairy tale reunion. I didn't expect her to call me dad or to suddenly erase years of lies. I knew this was going to be a journey, that it would take time and patience. But I also knew that this was a start, a small, fragile beginning that I wasn't going to take for granted. Since that day, Sophie and I have started to build something new. It's not easy, some days are harder than others. We're both learning how to be a part of each other's lives after so many years apart. She's trying to understand who I am, and I'm doing my best to support her in any way I can. As for my family, the ones who kept her from me, who lied and betrayed us both, I've made my choice. I won't let them back into my life, no matter how many times they come knocking. They may have torn my past apart, but they don't get to control my future. This time it's my choice. And I'm choosing to build something real, something honest with the people who truly matter. It's strange looking back on everything I went through, all the heartbreak and betrayal. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the family you build means more than the family you're born into. And now, with Sophie and Sarah by my side, I feel like I'm finally right where I'm supposed to be. The family's return and revelation. So there I was, standing face to face with the people who'd hurt me the most, my family. They were back in my life after all these years, showing up out of nowhere, like they hadn't been ignoring me all this time. And I couldn't help but wonder why now. Why show up now, after everything? I looked at them, and all I saw were strangers. These weren't the same people I remembered. They looked desperate, like they needed something from me. And that's when I realized they weren't here because they cared. They were here because I'd made a name for myself. They'd seen my interview, seen my success, and suddenly I was valuable to them again. It was almost laughable, really. But I needed answers. I wasn't going to let them walk back into my life without an explanation. I demanded to know why they'd cut me off, why they'd abandoned me when I needed them the most. And that's when my mom looked at me, took a deep breath, and finally, she started talking. She told me about my ex-wife Lily. She said Lily hadn't left me because she fell out of love. No, it was something much worse. Lily had been cheating on me, not with a stranger, not with some guy from work, but with my own cousin Jake. Hearing those words, it was like the ground had just dropped out from under me. My cousin? My own family? I couldn't wrap my head around it. All those years I'd spent blaming myself, wondering what I'd done wrong. And it turned out, they'd known all along. They knew, and they'd chosen to keep it from me. And the reason? My mom looked at me and said, we had to protect the family business. Jake's father, my uncle, was also my dad's boss. And apparently keeping Jake and his father happy was more important than telling me the truth. More important than standing by me when my marriage fell apart. So, they cut me off, threw me out of their lives, all to keep the family ties intact. It was like a bad dream. I was standing there staring at these people who'd chosen money, business, and appearances over their own son, their own brother. They had lied to me, cut me out, all to protect someone who destroyed my marriage. But that wasn't the worst of it. No, there was one more bombshell they dropped that day. My mom, in a quiet, almost ashamed voice, told me that Lily had been pregnant when she left me. She'd been carrying my child, a child I never knew existed. A daughter. Sophie. My own daughter. For 21 years, they'd kept Sophie from me. They'd let her grow up believing that Jake was her father, let her live in a lie, just so they could keep things clean for the family. My parents, my sister, they all knew. They'd all been a part of it, watching her grow up, knowing she was my child, but never telling me. Never once thinking that I had a right to know. I can't describe the pain I felt in that moment. It was like every piece of my past had been stolen from me, every happy memory tainted by this web of lies. My own family had stolen years from me, years I could have spent with my daughter. And now, they stood there, hoping I'd forgive them, hoping we could just go back to being a happy family, now that I was successful. But I knew then that there was no going back. This wasn't something I could forgive. This wasn't something I could just brush off. They had betrayed me in ways I never thought possible. And for what? For business? For some fake idea of family loyalty that had nothing to do with actual loyalty? They'd chosen my cousin, a man who'd lied and cheated, over me, their own flesh and blood. But through all that anger, all that hurt, there was one thing I knew I had to do. I had to find Sophie. She was innocent in all of this, just as much a victim as I was. She'd been lied to her whole life, made to believe in a story that wasn't true. I had to reach out to her, to give her the choice to know her real father, to know the truth about her own life. So I walked out of that meeting, leaving my so-called family behind, knowing I'd probably never look back. They were just people now, people who'd chosen money over love, business over loyalty. And as painful as it was, I knew I was done with them. My focus was now on Sophie, on rebuilding something real, something honest with her. And that's what brings me to where I am today. Starting over with my daughter by my side, learning to be a family again, one step at a time. It's not easy. And I know there's a lot of healing left to do. But for the first time, I feel like I'm finally building something that truly matters. Because sometimes, the people you thought you needed the most are the ones you're better off without. And sometimes, the family you find along the way. They're the ones who will stand by you, no matter what. Ethan and Sophie's initial meeting. So there I was, about to meet my daughter for the first time. I can't even explain how I felt. Nervous doesn't begin to cover it. I'd spent weeks thinking about what I'd say, how I'd explain everything without overwhelming her. I mean, she was 21 years old, she had a whole life, memories. A family that had lied to her about who she was. But I knew I had to be there for her no matter what. She deserved the truth. And she deserved the choice to know her real father. So, we agreed to meet in a small cafe, somewhere quiet where we could just talk. I got there early, of course, and every minute felt like an hour. I kept running through everything in my head, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if she'd even want me in her life. And then, the door opened, and there she was, my daughter, Sophie. She looked exactly like I'd imagined, but different too. She had this presence, this strength in her eyes, like she'd been through things I couldn't even begin to understand. It was like looking at a stranger. But at the same time, I felt this instant connection. This was my daughter, and for the first time she was standing right in front of me. We sat down, and for a moment we just looked at each other, taking it all in. I could see the questions in her eyes, the confusion, the anger. She'd grown up with a lie, believing that Jake was her father, that her whole life was something it wasn't. And now here I was, a stranger to her, but someone who shared her story in a way no one else could. She broke the silence first, asking the one question I'd been dreading: why hadn't I been there? Why had I let her grow up without knowing the truth? And as much as I wanted to make it all better, to somehow take away her pain, I knew I couldn't. All I could do was tell her the truth. I told her everything, from the day Lily left me without any explanation to the years I spent wondering why my own family had cut me off. I explained how I'd only found out the truth recently, after my family decided to reveal the lies they'd been keeping for over 2 decades. I told her that if I'd known she existed, if I'd known she was my daughter, I would have moved heaven and earth to be there for her. She didn't say much at first. I could tell she was processing it all, trying to piece together this new reality. And I didn't blame her, this wasn't an easy thing to take in. She'd been lied to her whole life by the people who were supposed to protect her. And now here I was, telling her everything she'd believed was wrong. But she surprised me. She looked at me, with tears in her eyes, and said, "I don't know what to feel yet. I'm hurt, I'm angry. But I also feel relieved. Because finally things make sense." That was all I needed to hear. I knew we had a long road ahead, that this was just the beginning of a journey that would take time, patience, and understanding. But she was willing to give it a chance. She wanted to know me, to understand where she came from, and to build something real, something that wasn't based on lies. From that day on, we started meeting regularly. It was slow, sometimes awkward, but we found our way. Each time we met, we'd share a little more of ourselves, talk about our lives, our dreams, our fears. I learned so much about her: how she loves photography, how she's always wanted to travel, how she struggled with trust because of everything she'd been through. And every time she opened up, I felt like I was finally getting to know my daughter, piece by piece. One day she told me she'd always felt like something was missing, like there was a part of her life she couldn't quite understand. And now, knowing the truth, she said she finally felt whole. I can't even explain how much that meant to me. Hearing her say that, knowing that I could be a part of her healing, that we could start to rebuild something together, it was more than I could have ever asked for. As the weeks went by, I started to see more of myself in her little quirks, ways she'd tilt her head when she was thinking, her love for cooking. It was like looking into a mirror, seeing a part of myself that had been hidden for so long. And I knew then that, no matter what happened, I would be there for her. That I would protect her in a way I hadn't been able to before. As for my family, the ones who lied, who betrayed us both, I made my decision. I told them I was done. No more trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. They had made their choice, chosen their secrets and lies over me, over Sophie. And now I was making mine. My focus was on the future, on building a real, honest relationship with my daughter, free from the lies that had defined my past. I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if Sophie and I will ever truly heal from all the hurt. But I do know one thing: we're in this together now. And for the first time I feel like I'm finally building a family I can trust. One built on truth, on love, and on second chances. Because in the end, family isn't about blood. It's about who's there for you when it matters most. And now, Sophie and I, we're ready to face the future, together. Moving forward, Ethan's new focus. From that point on, everything started to change. It wasn't like all the pain and betrayal just disappeared overnight, but for the first time I felt like I could actually leave the past behind. With Sophie by my side, I finally had a reason to look forward instead of back. We kept meeting, week after week, getting to know each other in ways we'd missed out on all those years. We shared stories, memories, dreams, even the small things like favorite movies, silly habits, and memories of our childhoods. I learned that she's a night owl, like me, loves a good cup of coffee, and has this laugh that can light up a room. Every moment with her felt like another piece of the life I'd lost was coming back to me. But it wasn't just about bonding over coffee and laughs. Sophie was carrying her own wounds, her own struggles from everything she'd been put through. She'd grown up in a family built on lies, and it had left scars. She told me how hard it had been, feeling like she never really knew who she was. She had trust issues, and honestly, who could blame her? I mean, her whole life had been a lie. And now, here she was, trying to rebuild her entire sense of self. As much as I wanted to make everything better for her, I knew this wasn't something I could fix overnight. Healing takes time, and I was willing to give her as much as she needed. I wanted to be there for her, to support her in a way my family never supported me. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure: I'd be the father she deserved, the father she should have had from the start. Together, we decided to take things one day at a time, focusing on building something real, something that could withstand the pain and lies of the past. And with each day I could see Sophie getting stronger, finding her own path, her own voice. She started talking about going back to school, exploring her love for photography, even traveling someday. It was like watching a flower finally bloom after being hidden away in the dark for too long. And as for me, I found peace in knowing that I was right where I was supposed to be. I didn't need validation from my family, didn't need their acceptance or approval. They had made their choice, and so had I. I'd chosen Sophie, chosen my own happiness, and in that decision, I felt free. The truth is, sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you end up with. And that's okay. Life has a funny way of putting the right people in your path when you need them most. For me, that person was Sophie. And now we were both free to build a life together, on our own terms. With each passing day I felt lighter. I had Sarah, my wife, by my side, and she's been a rock through all of this. She welcomed Sophie with open arms, gave her the warmth and kindness that only someone who's been through their own struggles could understand. And with the three of us together, I finally felt like I had the family I'd always dreamed of. One built on love, honesty, and second chances. I look at Sophie now, and I don't just see a daughter I never knew I had. I see strength, resilience, and a future that's brighter than anything I could have imagined. She's no longer defined by the lies of her past. She's writing her own story now. And me? I get to be a part of it, in a way I never thought possible. Life doesn't always go the way we plan, and sometimes, the people we think will stand by us are the ones who hurt us the most. But if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that we don't have to be held down by the pain of our past. We can choose to move forward, to create our own happiness, to build a life that we're proud of, surrounded by people who truly care. And that's what I'm doing now, with Sophie, with Sarah, with the family I've found along the way. Because in the end, the real strength isn't in holding on to those who've hurt you. It's in finding the courage to let go and make room for the people who bring you peace. The conclusion and final thoughts. So here I am, looking back on everything that's happened, all the twists and turns, the betrayals, and the moments I thought would break me. It's strange to think about how much my life has changed. If you told me years ago that I'd be here, standing on the other side of all that pain, building a real family, I wouldn't have believed you. But now, I wouldn't change a thing. Looking back, I see that everything I went through, the heartbreak, the isolation, even the lies, led me to this point. It taught me what truly matters in life. I learned that family isn't always about blood sometimes. It's about the people who stand by you, the ones who show up when it counts, who love you for who you are, not what you can give them. And I think that's the part one want people to understand. We get so caught up in trying to hold on to people just because they're family, just because they're supposed to love us. But sometimes letting go of those who hurt us is the only way to make room for the people who truly belong in our lives. It's not about giving up, it's about choosing peace over pain, growth over grudges. With Sophie, I feel like I've been given a second chance, not just at being a father but at being part of a real, honest relationship. One where there are no lies, no secrets, just two people trying to make up for lost time and build something genuine. And with Sarah by my side, supporting me every step of the way, I finally feel like I have a family I can trust. And as for my parents, my sister, all those people who turned their backs on me, I've made my peace with them. I don't carry that weight anymore. It took time, a lot of hard lessons, but I realized that holding on to anger only kept me tied to a past I didn't want to live in. They made their choices, and I've made mine. I've chosen to be free. Now, each day feels like a fresh start. I look forward to the future with Sophie, to all the moments we'll share, the memories we'll make. I look forward to growing old with Sarah, knowing we've built a life that's real and rooted in love. And I look forward to finally living a life that's about the people who truly matter, the ones who add peace and joy to my life, instead of pain and regret. So, if you're watching this and you're struggling with the weight of betrayal, with the pain of people who've let you down, remember this: sometimes, the greatest strength comes from letting go. From walking away from the people who don't deserve a place in your life, and choosing to fill it with those who do. It's not an easy path, but it's one that leads to real happiness, to real love. And at the end of the day, isn't that what we're all looking for? A family, a life, a love that's true. I've found mine. And if I can get here after everything, so can you. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings you some peace, some clarity, and maybe even the courage to find your own path to happiness. Remember, you're stronger than you think, and the best is yet to come.